I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was raining in little drizzles that morning, the kind that makes the asphalt smell like wet cement. I was hunched over the counter at the corner cafe, scrolling through my phone like I didn't have a single plan for the day. Half of the texts I typed never got sent. Half of my thoughts stopped mid-sentence because I couldn't be bothered to finish them. My coffee order, black, no sugar, extra hot, was practically a habit at this point, but somehow she still got it right. "Morning, James." Her voice had that soft pause before the name, like she was weighing it, savoring it. I flicked my eyes toward her hands as she set my cup down, neatly, like she always did. Her fingers lingered a second too long on the saucer's edge, and I felt my chest tighten without meaning to. Morning," I said, because anything longer than that sounded unnecessary. She smiled, small, almost apologetic, and I noticed the way her hair caught the light from the window. Not perfect, not style, just her. I found myself glancing at her between sips. She moved around the cafe with the quiet certainty of someone who had seen all this 1,000 times before. Opening the register, nudging a chair straight, folding a napkin left behind by a customer. My gaze lingered a moment too long on the crease of her wrist as she reached for a sugar jar. "You've been quiet lately," she said, voice careful but not prying. I tried to shrug, but even that seemed to betray me. "Just busy," I muttered. The words felt thin, inadequate, but she didn't push. She just nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, eyes flicking toward mine for a fraction longer than polite. There was a pause where neither of us said anything. I think we both felt it, the quiet that stretched in a way that made the ordinary cafe feel almost intimate. My loneliness wasn't dramatic. It was small in the details, my unsent texts, my paused thoughts, the way I avoided looking too closely at anyone for too long. But with her, even the air between us seemed charged. "You still take it black?" she asked, refilling my cup before I could answer. I nodded, fumbling with the sleeve of my hoodie. There was a flicker of something, recognition, maybe amusement, in her eyes. She remembered. Not just my name, not just the coffee, but me. I wanted to say something clever, witty, meaningful, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I folded the napkin on the table once, twice, my fingers twitching. She watched, probably thinking I was absorbed in my own world. And maybe I was. "See you later, James," she said as she turned toward the counter again, tending to a customer. She didn't wait for my reply, and I didn't offer one. But I noticed the slight hesitation in her step, the way she paused before she poured another cup. It was nothing, and it was everything. I walked out into the drizzle, the city humming around me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from a friend, a reminder, anything ordinary. Instead, it was from her. "Did you forget something last night?" And for a second, the rain didn't feel cold at all. The next evening, I found myself on her porch, awkwardly holding a box of old books I'd promised to return. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the amber glow of the streetlights. She opened the door before I could knock, her cardigan slipping slightly off one shoulder as she stepped aside. "Thanks," she said, her voice soft, not the cafe's polished cadence, but something warmer, more private. I handed her the box, our fingers brushing, just a second, almost accidental, but it lingered longer in my chest than it should have. "I kept this one," she said, pulling a thin notebook from the stack. "It's silly, just notes from when I was teaching." She handed it to me, and I flipped through the pages, seeing sketches, lists, half-formed lesson plans. The handwriting was precise, but casual, the kind that feels intimate because someone once spent time thinking about it. "You taught?" I asked, though I already knew. My voice came out quieter than intended. "Years ago," she admitted, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Before everything changed." She didn't explain further. I didn't press. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken things, and I realized just how easy it was to imagine all the other versions of her. The one I didn't know, the one who existed before me noticing her. I tried to focus on the notebook, but my attention drifted. The way her thumb traced the cover absent-mindedly, the faint scent of jasmine from her sweater, the subtle tilt of her head when she watched me read. You always notice things, she said, almost teasing, but there was something else there. Curiosity, maybe, or a caution. I notice, I murmured. Not a confession. Not a lie. Just true. We moved inside, and she offered me tea. We sat at the small kitchen table, the city noises dim behind closed windows. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. I imagined all the what-ifs, staying here too long, saying something I shouldn't, noticing too much. My heart beat against the cautious fence I'd built around myself, and still I wanted to cross it. You've got a quiet kind of patience, I said finally, words coming out in pieces. I mean, with people. With life, I guess. She looked at me, and I caught her glance flicker to my hands, resting on the table, fiddling with the edge of my cup. A small smile appeared, just at the corner of her lips. I suppose, she said, and that was all. Nothing dramatic, nothing certain. Just acknowledgement. Then she stood to clear the cups, and I helped, leaning slightly too close to hand her the cloth. Our fingers touched again, light, fleeting, but this time she didn't pull away immediately. For a moment, she looked at me, and I felt the world shrink to that single, fragile instant. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I thought later, walking home under streetlights that left everything else in shadow. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. And somewhere, in the small quiet of that kitchen, I thought she might have felt the same. I kept thinking about her notebook the next morning, the way her thumb had lingered over the pages like she wasn't ready to let go. I meant to return it right away, but somehow I found myself lingering outside her building, hands stuffed in my hoodie pockets, pretending to check my phone. When she opened the door, her smile was small, careful, polite, but not warm in the way it had been before. She held the notebook against her chest, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Morning," I said. "Morning," she replied. Pause. You dropped this." She handed me a single receipt that had fluttered to the floor the night before. My fingers brushed hers, light almost nothing, but my pulse caught anyway. She pulled back immediately, eyes flicking toward the hallway like someone might be watching. There was something in her posture, hesitant, closed off, that made me hesitate in turn. I wanted to ask if she remembered last night, wanted to press just enough to feel the spark again, but the words stuck. Later, in the kitchen, I found myself fixing her kettle, or at least pretending to. She moved around me, careful not to get too close, and I noticed how her hand lingered on the counter when she passed. Small gestures, quiet, and still enough to make my chest tighten. "You haven't called in a while," I said, testing the air. Not a question, not a statement, just an unfinished thought. She looked up, and I could tell she caught it, and caught herself from saying anything. "I've been busy," she said finally. Short, nothing more. We ate breakfast in silence, the kettle whistling faintly. I wanted to reach across the table, touch her hand, just once, but I didn't. Instead, I watched the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, the quiet rhythm of her morning. My mind wandered. What would it be like if I leaned closer? If I said something, anything, that crossed that invisible line? And then there was a sound, her neighbor laughing down the hall, footsteps approaching. She stiffened, straightened her cardigan. I could feel her pulling back even as I stayed frozen. Timing, circumstance, caution, all conspiring against the moment. Later, when I was leaving, I paused at the door. She leaned on the frame, notebook in hand, eyes lingering just a fraction too long. I swallowed, heart hammering, caught between moving forward and stepping back. I should go," I said, voice trailing off. My thumb brushed the doorframe, then hers, almost by accident. We both froze. For half a second, I imagined it. Leaning closer, her eyes softening, the air filling with everything we hadn't said. Then someone laughed in the hallway again. My pulse slowed, disappointment coiling quietly. "See you," she said, just above a whisper. "See you," I replied, though neither of us moved. Our shoulders almost touched, fingers almost brushed, words almost spoken, and that was enough to leave me walking down the street with a knot in my stomach, thinking of all the things I hadn't said, all the things I shouldn't. It was one of those evenings when the city felt unusually empty, as if it had paused to watch. I found her on the bench outside her building, notebook in hand, flipping pages with that careful deliberation she always had. The sky had a dull pink glow, fading fast, and the air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and jasmine. I sat down a foot away, hands gripping the edges of the bench like they might slip away. She didn't look up at first, just continued scanning the pages. I wanted to ask if she'd been thinking about me, or if that touch last week had meant anything at all. I didn't. Words always seemed too loud. You saw him today, I said finally, because it was true. One of my friends had been in her cafe, and I had noticed her brief, polite smile to him. My throat tightened, guilt and something else curling together like smoke. Her pen paused mid-page. He dropped by. She didn't sound annoyed, just cautious. I hesitated, fingers twitching, imagining the conversation that might follow if I were bolder, braver, less careful. Yeah, just talking. The words felt hollow. I wanted to say more, that I didn't like seeing her with anyone else, that I didn't like feeling like a visitor in her quiet world. She finally looked up. Her eyes softened, but there was distance there too. I shouldn't have stayed so late at the counter, she said. You probably noticed. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, then let it fall again. A small gesture, but my chest ached. I didn't answer immediately. My mind raced. Why was I sitting here, thinking about every second I hadn't touched her hand, every word I hadn't said? My thumb traced the edge of my sleeve. I imagined leaning closer, telling her everything I shouldn't, confessing how much these brief moments mattered. But the words wouldn't form. She closed the notebook gently, careful not to meet my eyes directly. I shouldn't keep you, she said, and I could hear the almost hidden tremor in her voice, the same tremor I'd seen the first time she paused at the counter. Something was breaking quietly inside her. Don't go, I said almost instinctively. Too late, I realized how it sounded, desperate, clumsy. I pressed my hands into my knees to steady them, wishing I could take it back. She paused, and that pause stretched long enough to feel like eternity. Her lips parted slightly, maybe to answer, maybe to say nothing at all. The street around us hummed. Distant car, tires against wet asphalt, a dog barking somewhere far off. And in that quiet, exposed space, I wanted to bridge the distance between us. Wanted to tell her how the waiting, the small gestures, the almost touches had become the only thing I looked forward to. Instead, she shifted slightly, turning her body away, just enough to remind me that some lines weren't meant to be crossed. I realized she was holding something back, a wall I hadn't yet cracked. I swallowed hard. My words faltered, paused, never finished. And just like that, the moment hung in the air between us. Waiting, asking a question neither of us had the courage to say aloud. It was 2 nights later when I realized she'd stopped texting first. Not abruptly, not angrily, just absent. My phone felt heavier in my pocket, buzzing less with the familiar pattern of little check-ins or jokes. I told myself she was busy, that it was nothing, but my chest ached with the quiet weight of absence. I decided to walk by her apartment anyway, hoping for a glimpse, an accidental meeting. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and rain. Her door was slightly ajar, and I thought I saw her silhouette moving inside. I pressed my ear to the frame, hesitating before I knocked. Voices. Another voice. Male. Low, calm, familiar in a way that didn't belong to me. I stepped back, silent, listening to laughter I couldn't place. There was no anger, no confrontation, only a casual intimacy that made my stomach tighten. I realized she wasn't just her in the quiet moments we'd shared. She had a past, a life, layers I hadn't seen. My hope, fragile as it was, wavered. The next day, I saw her at the cafe, calm, polite, notebook in hand, but something had shifted. She smiled when she saw me, but didn't reach her eyes in the same way. My pulse kept tripping over itself. Hope and hesitation tangled together. I wanted to ask her, wanted to know who he was, what he meant, if I'd been imagining our closeness or misreading it all. But I didn't. My mouth opened and closed, words failing me like they had so many times before. Instead, I lingered on small gestures. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, how her fingers brushed the counter, the way she stirred her coffee without looking up. Each movement became a riddle I wanted to solve, a signal I couldn't read. That evening, I typed a message on my phone. Just a line. Simple. Casual. A joke about the rain. I stared at it for minutes. Backspace. Rewrite. Delete. My thumb hovered over send until I couldn't bear it. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I walked past her building again, noticing the faint glow of light spilling from her window. Someone else was there, moving around, laughing, living in the space that I had thought might have been ours alone. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I didn't call. Sitting on the curb under a street lamp, I let the quiet settle in around me. No anger. No dramatic heartbreak. Just pause. The kind of pause where the world feels unfinished and you don't know if it ever will be. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The notebook was still on her counter, the teacup she'd left behind, drying slowly. The city moved around me, unbothered, and I realized that some things, some people, could linger in your chest without ever giving you the answers you wanted. I found her in the kitchen that evening, the light dim, the kettle just stopped whistling. The notebook lay open on the counter, pages fluttering slightly as she moved. My chest felt tight, a coil of everything I hadn't said, everything I wanted to say, all pressed into one small moment. She looked up when I entered, and for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw the same hesitation mirrored in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but the careful pause of someone who knows how fragile a line can be. I started. My voice felt too loud, too clumsy. I swallowed and tried again. I shouldn't. I trailed off, unsure if I meant I shouldn't be here, shouldn't care, shouldn't speak. She didn't answer, just shifted, reaching for the teacup I hadn't noticed. Fingers brushing the rim, slow. I wanted to step closer, wanted to lean in and fill the space between us, but I stayed frozen, tethered by doubt. Finally, she said, You don't have to leave. Not a command, not a plea. Just observation. My chest loosened just a little. I took a careful step toward her, words still lodged in my throat. The thought of another man, of missed moments, of things unspoken, rose and fell like waves. Then I stopped, letting the pause hang, letting her see the weight of it without forcing it into language. She looked at me then, fully, and I noticed the flicker of softness in her eyes. I've been thinking, she said slowly, almost whispering. Thinking about what could be if we didn't. I don't know. Her pause was everything. I realized the risk wasn't in speaking anymore. It was in imagining what might be lost. Our balance, our daily rhythms, the quiet routines that had grown around us. I reached out, not touching at first, just hovering, letting my hand be seen, offering something without demanding it. She met it halfway, fingertips brushing mine, light, deliberate. The connection was small, tangible, human. No words, no promises, just acknowledgement. We stood there in silence for a long beat. My heartbeat settled slow, steady. The kettle hissed faintly in the background. Outside, the city moved on. Okay, she said finally, letting the word fill the space between us. Soft, quiet, but enough. Enough to hold the weight of what we just shared. I nodded. No answer needed. Just the brush of fingers, the gentle acknowledgement that we had crossed a line, but not over it. Not with theatrics, not with declarations, just with small, human truth. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like something fragile, unresolved, but real was ours. Weeks had passed, though it felt like months in the small, measured way life keeps track of moments. I found her one morning at the cafe, 8:47 a.m. On the dot, black coffee in hand, notebook open. The familiar hum of grinders and clinking cups felt like home. Ordinary, steady, the kind of rhythm you don't notice until someone else shows up to share it. She glanced up when I sat across from her, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. You're punctual, she said, not teasing, just stating fact. I shrugged, hiding the quiet satisfaction I felt at being noticed. We talked. mostly in fragments and half sentences, like we always had. About the rain, about neighbors, about nothing important, yet everything felt weighted in the best possible way. Our fingers brushed when passing sugar or stirring spoons. No words needed. One afternoon, we walked past the park bench where so many of our hesitations had taken place. She laughed softly at a memory I hadn't meant to share aloud, the kind of laugh that rises quietly and lingers. I remember the first time we sat there, both hesitant, both careful, both holding back. Now, our shoulders bumped casually, no tension, no almost. Just us. I noticed how she folded her napkin without thinking, how her thumb rested on the edge of the coffee cup as if she'd done it 1,000 times. I remembered noticing the same gesture months ago, and for the first time, it didn't make my chest ache. It felt warm, familiar, earned. At her apartment, the kettle hissed softly in the background. She handed me a cup of tea, just like before. I caught her eyes for a second, longer this time, and she let the quiet hang between us. No declaration, no ruse, just acknowledgement that we had built something small, patient, and ours. She stirred her tea, glanced out the window at the drizzle, then looked back at me. "I'm glad we didn't rush," she said, almost to herself. I nodded. No answer needed. Later, I left her building, phone in pocket, notebook in hand, coffee gone cold. But for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of absence. The city hummed around me, ordinary and indifferent, and yet it felt like the right background for this life we were carving quietly together. I thought about the bench, the black coffee, the unsent messages, the almost touches, the night's pause between us. None of it had been perfect. None of it had been easy, but had been real, and somehow that was enough. And as I walked on, I realized something only we would ever understand. That love isn't always a grand gesture. Sometimes it's a shared notebook, a teacup held in your hand, and the quiet certainty that someone will be there at 8:47 a.m., noticing the little things.